You're listening to The Sound of Pursuit. I'm Hal Humphreys, your host, and I am absolutely tickled to be joined today by Ramesh Nyberg. Ramesh, he's been on the show before. He's written for Pursuit magazine, but for those of you that don't know Ramesh, we're talking to a guy who spent 27 years in Florida law enforcement, 22 as a homicide detective. He's written articles on police issues for a ton of publications, including a column for the Miami Herald. Ramesh retired in 2006, started Nyberg Security and Investigations. He's written 2 books, The 10 Must-Haves to be a Great Investigator, and his latest book, Badge, Tie, and Gun, Life and Death Journeys of a Miami Detective. You can find that on Amazon. Ramesh, thank you so much for being here today. I literally cannot thank you enough. I know you're a busy man. Tell us a little bit about your background in law enforcement and how you ended up in the private investigations world.
Sure. Well, thank you, Hal, for having me on. It's a pleasure, as always. I started in law enforcement in 1979, and it was a little bit of a different world and for police officers back then. How I got into private investigation was after I retired. I worked in I worked in real estate for a while. I worked as a teacher, and I still do teach, but I really missed being involved in investigations. And I also realized that, I knew a lot of attorneys and was pretty still well connected in the legal community. So I decided to take advantage of that and open my own agency. And it's been good. It's been really good.
You said once, I grew up with Miami and Miami grew up with me. Talk about coming of age in Miami and how that shaped your character and your career.
Yeah, I really didn't fully understand that phrase myself. I wasn't aware of it until I started to write my book and reflect a little bit. And I realized that, I was, when I turned 18, that was 1976. I was, starting to think about law enforcement a year later. And Miami was changing at that time. Miami was going through a metamorphosis, not necessarily in a good way. Crime was on the rise in a big way. The cocaine wars were just starting to get stirred up. That whole drama with Griselda and all that stuff that people have been watching on Netflix, that was all starting right around the time that I was interested in getting into law enforcement. And that, that wasn't the reason why I got into law enforcement. I wanted to get into the profession, but it's kind of like we just kind of were on a collision course for a lot of action. And the next 27 years were really just an amazing journey. And so I knew I'd have to write about it at some point.
Now, sidebar question, you were active in law enforcement in Miami for the entire run of the show Miami Vice. How real was it?
I'll be honest with you. I didn't watch it much because I didn't like it. So that kind of tells you, that's a little bit of my answer right there. It's a fun show, and Hollywood has to be fun, and they got to be entertaining. And I didn't know any homicide detectives or any detectives otherwise that lived on a sailboat. Although, ironically, I did a lot of sailing as a kid. My dad built sailboats, and we were always out on the water, but didn't have a pet alligator, nothing like that.
Oh, I have I've long for a long time. I've got a friend that retired from the FBI, lives just north of Miami, and we started talking about the idea of opening up a hotline for private investigators. If you had any questions, you could call Miami Advice.
Oh, interesting. Okay, nice little play on words there.
I thought it was a good idea. Anyway, all right. So, you've written several articles for Pursuit magazine. A recent article you wrote talks about hacks for investigators. When people hear the term hack, myself included, a lot of times you think of some kind of a cheat or a shortcut that gets you somewhere without actually doing the work. But you're not talking about that. What are you talking about when you talk about hacks for people who are not hacks? What does that mean?
Well, I think private investigators have to be extra resourceful. They have to get creative. When I was in law enforcement, a lot of times we'd have to get creative sometimes, but we had authority. We had this beautiful thing that was bestowed by government upon us, and there, we could do a lot of things with subpoenas and warrants and things like that that private investigators simply don't have access to. Getting into a gated community was not a problem for us. Just flipped your badge and you were in. But we PIs have to do things a different way, and so you have to get creative. You have to think outside the box. You have to be what they call audible ready. If some of you might be, familiar with that term, and be able to meet with circumstances as they arise, and as you know how the unexpected is bound to happen. Murphy's law, things will go wrong, and all those sorts of things. So you have to have a toolbox that's got some variety, and be ready to grab the right tool, and that takes some experience. It takes some learning from a mentor, things of that nature.
I tell people, from the PI perspective, we don't have a badge. We can't just show people a badge. We have charm and good looks, and I'm batting 300.
There you go. That's true. Yeah, you have to. I think the gab helps, and I think a little imagination helps a lot.
An imagination helps a great deal in this business. You talk about you learned tricks and techniques from officers and detectives you've worked with, but more importantly, you say that you adapted aspects of their mindset. Tell me about that. What does the mindset have to do with this? How is that a hack?
Well, I don't know if it's a hack per se, but the mindset is so important, and I think you have to have confidence in what you're doing, and you have to have a can-do attitude. It sounds corny, but really that is the truth. The best detectives that I worked with in my career were not geniuses. They weren't guys with, master's degrees or anything else. They were just hardworking guys who refused to give up, who paid great attention to detail, who stayed as organized as they possibly could, and used lead sheets and things like that. And that's something very simple that I don't think a lot of non-law enforcement uh, private investigators even think about. Things like taking notes and things like keeping a separate pad for each case. Don't mix up your cases on one legal pad when you're taking notes. Use a lead sheet, which is simply a to-do list. It's
Yeah.
like a honeydew list.
Yeah.
Very important, and that helps you stay organized and stay on task, and keep the direction of your investigation moving forward.
I love it. I did some work out in Texas several years ago on a case, and I was working for the defense, and it was an ongoing case. The defendant had several charges and was racking up more and more charges as time went on. There was a police detective that was working on the other side for the prosecution, and for some reason, he did not like me. And we had met a couple of times and didn't get on very well. Um, but I gotta say, that guy was a good detective. And the way he did it was he wasn't the smartest detective. He wasn't he wasn't the most trained detective, but he was dogged and he was curious and he kept really meticulous notes and he just did the work. And that at the end of the day, taking the time to just do the work seems like a superpower because a lot of people don't want to do it.
That's true. That is really true. They think there's some magic formula or something that's going to get you to your destination, and there's really nothing to replace hard work and diligence, as you were talking about. And depending on how busy a person you are, how much you're involved in this thing, if you've got a lot of cases coming in, they might start bleeding over each other. You might be handling two or three cases at a time, and so that's where these factors are so important. The lead sheets, the legal pads, the things I just mentioned are essential.
Yeah. And I switched from I still have a reporter's notebook just because I love the way it fits in my back pocket and I can write for a long page on it. Um, I still carry that with me and I still use it. But I also about I don't know 5 or 6 years ago started doing all of the interviews using an iPad. And what that allows me to do is I can create a folder in the software on the iPad and make notes and then save that folder. Then I go to the next case, open that folder and do my notes and do that thing. You know,
You're way ahead of me.
technology is a beautiful thing sometimes. All right, so Ramesh and I have spent probably 30 minutes trying to get into this this software to do this program. And how did we get in? We got in here by doing the work, by just troubleshooting and doing the work. But, you know, at the end of the day, keeping notes is of critical importance. Doing the work, knocking on the doors, talking to the people,
Yes.
as you say, a lead sheet, or I would call it a task list or a day task list or something like that. Just something to keep you on track and moving. I had an interview last week with an investigator who has retired, and he's involved in a case where our client has been charged with making false statements to a government official. This investigator that I went to interview, he did not make notes.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah.
the charge of making false statements is possibly going to be very difficult to prove, because all it is what the investigator says happened and what our client says happened.
Right.
And as an investigator, I just find that to be really frustrating, because all you got to do is keep track of what you're doing. It's not
Yeah.
that hard.
Yeah. And don't trust your own memory. And you know, you'd be surprised. You know, in a given year, you look back at your notes and you go, "Wow, I forgot about that."
Oh
Right.
God,
So
yes.
and so that's where your legal pad and your lead sheet are your best friends. And you know, you were talking about knocking on doors. We had in homicide, we had a sign above our entrance to the office that said Goya Cod, Goyakod, and it stood for get off your ass and knock on doors. You know, you're not going to find the solution to your case inside the squad room.
Yes.
And that was our motto. That was our culture.
Yeah. Yeah. I love it. And you know what? Call it a hack, call it what you will. I mean, just again, going back to just doing the work sometimes seems like a superpower, because so many people don't want to do it. So for investigators out there in the crowd listening to this, if you're looking for a shortcut, if you're looking for the quick way to get somewhere, just get stuck in and do the work.
That's true. And you know, don't ever underestimate the importance of an interview, especially that initial interview with your client. Because what you got to remember is that people don't always tell you everything. It may not be that they're holding back. It might be that they just are not that way. So don't be afraid to ask probing questions of your client.
Yeah.
You'd be surprised you might find out.
Yeah, yeah, I love it. Well, Ramesh, let's do this. Let's talk about your book. Now, you've got a new book out. I'm pretty excited about it. I'm going to try this. I'm going to switch to a screen that just has me on it real quick so I can show the folks your new book. This is available on Amazon. Let's see. Badge, Tie, and Gun, Life and Death Journeys of a Miami Detective. Ramesh, let's talk about the book. What's it about and who's it for?
Well, I'll answer the last question first. It's really for anyone who is a true crime fan. It's for anyone who is interested in how police work is done. It's anyone who's interested in Miami. A little bit of Miami history slips in there every so often, and it's about my career. It's also about my growing up in Miami, kind of intertwined, right? So there's some flashbacks to my childhood, and the reason I do that is because some of those flashbacks are relevant to the cases I worked, to the experiences I had as an adult working homicide cases. And I never really expected that when I started writing. It just sort of happened organically. So it's really for anybody that's interested in getting real, authentic police stories from someone who was an insider.
Yeah, yeah, and you know, with a lot of true crime fiction out there today, you know that's produced by people who are not involved in the system. You got to wonder sometimes if they're getting things right. And I don't have a law enforcement background. I have a great deal of respect for those who do, but I think professional investigators have a lot to learn from law enforcement. Talk to me about that.
Yeah, I think so. and this was not written as a how-to book by any stretch. I tried to do that in the 10 must-haves. The first one was kind of a small manual type of publication. But in this book, I just wanted to convey stories. I wanted to convey what it was like, what not just what the crime scene looked like or what the bodies looked like, but what we felt like as investigators doing the work, what it was like for us to do that kind of work, what it was like for us to sit with the next of kin while they're grieving and hold their hand, and the things, a lot of stuff that you really don't see in Hollywood that's not portrayed realistically in Hollywood. Um, and so that's really what I was trying to convey, the kind of behind the scenes type.
And it seems like you're almost setting the record straight about the realities of police work, whereas the fictionalized version oftentimes doesn't portray those things. If at all, if they do, it's oftentimes not accurate.
Yeah, that's true. You were just talking about books and movies, and I just recently read a book by a best-selling author. I won't name him, but he got a couple of things pretty badly wrong, and he's a bestseller. I mean, his stuff is wildly popular. So, listen, people at the end of the day, people want entertainment, and if you read his stuff, you're going to get that, and you'll get about 95%, 90%, pretty accurate, but the rest of it,
85%.
yeah, it's around a little bit. But I've always been a stickler for that, and I don't think you can work in a profession like this as long as I did and not be a stickler. I mean, my wife has to elbow me from time to time and say, just stop muttering and just enjoy the show. We'll be watching a show on Netflix or something, and so it's hard to get out of your blood.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, let me ask you this last question about the book. What do you hope people will take away from reading your book? If a private investigator out there picks up the book, what do you hope they take away with it?
Well, I think a couple of things. I think that I want them to see how real homicide squads, real detective squads worked on major cases. The type of processes that we used, um, how we generally did not work alone. And this is a tough thing for PIs. You don't have opportunities very often to work on a squad of people as a PI. If you can do it, I highly suggest you do, even a partner, two or three people that have the responsibilities, that can cover a lot of ground at one time. We would work the crime scene. We would have another one or two detectives doing the area canvas at the same time. Meet up, communicate often. If you're going to do that, communicate often. Make sure you're keeping everybody up to speed. Um, and I just think that's would be a great value for a private investigator alone.
Yeah.
Um, as far as other people, I hope that they can see the human side of what it likes to investigate crimes, what it's like to deal with people, suspects, next of kin, witnesses that we did day in and day out. You learn an awful lot about human behavior,
Yeah, no
and
doubt.
that private investigators could certainly benefit from as well.
Very good. Tell us the name of the book one more time and where can we buy it?
It's called Badge, Tie, and Gun: Life and Death Journeys of a Miami Detective. It's on Amazon as a Kindle ebook and also in paperback. You can get it on barnesandnoble.com as paperback, and then Apple Books and a bunch of other Smashwords, I think it's called, carries it as well.
Awesome. Ramesh, thank you for taking the time to be here. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. We finally got this tech thing. Us old guys finally got this tech thing figured out and got this recording done. I really appreciate it, and please keep in touch. And I know Kim Green would be absolutely tickled if you put together another article for Pursuit magazine in the not too distant future.
Well, thank you, Hal. It was my pleasure, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thanks a lot.
All right, cheers. And that is your Sound of Pursuit. I'm Hal Humphreys, your host. Hope you have a great rest of the day.